What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, and on this episode, I'm joined once again by my buddy Phil Rothermich. We're here to break down everything in the Premier Lacrosse League. So, Phil, welcome back to the show.
Hey man, thanks so much for having me. Love being here. It's been a little while. Happy to be back. Hope you're doing well, man. Thank you.
Yeah, so like I told you off air before we jumped on here on the podcast, got a bunch of stuff that we got to go over here from the past several weeks here in Premier Lacrosse League action. We'll get to some of your comments and thoughts that you guys submitted to me through my Twitter handle at Stevie Mac Media. We'll get to some of those a bit later on in the show. But the thing I wanted to start off here with was the news that came out I believe it was Tuesday evening, about Justin Guterding being traded from the Chrome to the Whipsnakes in getting back. The Chrome are going to get rookie defenseman Nick Grill. So I want to get your reactions to that trade.
Yeah, I mean this is it's a tough one. Of course we all Gutty was one of the original six. He was one of the original six faces along with Schreiber and Rabel and K-Teen and Rambo and whoever else. So that it was wild to see him get traded. Of course, in the last couple of years, we've learned that seemingly nobody is safe. It seems like everyone's on the table to be talked with anyone. As far as this trade goes, though, I mean, it makes sense for both teams. I think this is a bigger it shows us a little more that maybe Rambo won't be around anytime soon. If Rambo was supposed to be here this weekend, why would they worry about it? And now Gutty's a lefty as Rambo is, and they're totally different players, right? Totally different guys. But at the end of the day, you know what it is? They're both great attackmen. Done. I mean, that's what it is. And I think when I try to think about who might have won this trade, it's very tough for me because I feel like Grill, in a way, is almost like a prospect, right? I mean, he really hasn't played a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. The guy's unbelievable. If you look him up on Maryland's website, I mean, it looks like a CVS receipt full of accolades. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, right? But the point is we haven't really seen him a lot in the PLL. That's a different league. It's a new thing. And then so I was tied up on what part of that is the pro and what's the con, and then conversely you have Gutty, and Gutty's having a rough year this year. I think he's got 6 points, I think. But in my mind, I mean, he's proven. We all see what he does, and this year he's on a Chrome team that is struggling, but it's also a Chrome team with great players, but a lot of different players. They're all trying to figure out who they are, and they keep adding guys. I mean, they added Palisak a few weeks ago, then they add Malloy, and they got Heacock from the beginning of this year, and they lost Jordan Wolf. He's gone. So it's kind of like everyone's trying to fit, and I wonder, is that's what's making Gutty not be as productive as he normally is? Kind of where are we there? So as far as this trade goes, I think it makes sense for both teams. Who won the trade? I'm really stuck on, because every time I go back and forth, I think about it. And I also think how the Chrome right now have a lot of offensive guys. They have a lot of guys. It's turning into a point where it's like, well, who are they going to pull off the field to put this guy out there? Because everyone should be on there. Having said that, man, I still am surprised to see that Gutty got traded. I really am. But, yeah, I think it's a good trade for both teams. I think it tells us that Rambo's probably out for a little while. And it's going to be weird. It's going to be real weird seeing that dude rock Whipsnake uni. I mean, that's going to be a tough one. So anyhow, those are my thoughts overall. I don't know if being pressed, I'd probably say Whipsnakes, but yeah, it's tough to say.
Yeah, just real quick to give my thoughts on it. I know I said to a couple people that messaged me the other night about it when the news broke about the trade, I said I would give my thoughts here on this episode. I think, and we've talked about this even with guys like Jordan on past episodes here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, is that when we talk about these trades, it's so hard, especially this early, to assess these trades and to say who necessarily won that trade per se. So I know we've always tended to stay away from doing that, but I think at least for me and my reaction to the trade was that both teams kind of got what they needed out of it. The Whipsnakes needed offense with the absence of Rambo. That's something that I covered on Monday's episode. With him this year, they were averaging 13 and a half goals a game. Without him, just 8.5. So obviously they needed something there offensively. Maybe Guterding can be that guy. And I think for Guterding in particular, he may be, and you kind of touched on it with some of the new additions they've had on offense, maybe he needed a fresh start in a new offense where maybe he can be more of a factor. And maybe that's with Whipsnakes, maybe not. Maybe he becomes sort of like a rental player for the rest of the year. And then once Rambo gets healthy in the off season, then they can trade him or whatever the case may be, and potentially get more in return than what they gave up for him. And I think when you look at the Chrome with what they got in Nick Grill, like you said, you look at his accomplishments at Maryland, the list just goes on and on. I had the privilege of watching him in person in a game that I called for the University of Michigan this past spring, and he was easily one of the two best defenders on the field, and I would argue the second one was also on Maryland's team as well, but just a phenomenal defender overall. And I think he goes into a situation with the Chrome where they've really struggled to stop people in terms of opposing offenses. So I think that he's a guy that can come in pretty much right away and be able to make a difference on that defense. Now, kind of the situation with Guterding, where is he going to be the answer for the Whipsnakes? I don't think that Nick Grill will be the answer for the Chrome, but I think that at least addressing that side of the field will definitely make a difference for the Chrome. But now I want to getting into this playoff picture that we now see really starting to take form here entering the last week of the regular season. The Atlas and the Water Dogs, I want to lead off with, didn't necessarily start the season the best way that they probably wanted to. Obviously, you look at a game in that week one matchup for the Atlas with the Archers, probably didn't go the way that they were hoping in that one, but have since been able to really turn things around. Same thing with the Water Dogs here as of late. Now, in that conversation for that number one seed in the postseason, they'll actually play in the final week of the regular season for that number one seed. So give me your thoughts on the Atlas and the Water Dogs this season.
Yeah, well, first, I think it's an interesting journey that they've both gotten to this point. You know, you look at the offseason and both did trades. Both, I mean, these two teams, I mean, you think about Ryan Brown even came over to the Water Dogs. I mean, they've had their own interactions. But they've done their own little moves to try to become a better team. Dylan Ward was a huge point at which they got Dylan Ward. That was a huge thing for them and their defense and their team. And then you look at Atlas and all the picks and players. I mean, it's a whole new team. It's a brand new expansion team over there with those guys. But you saw those going into this year because they weren't happy with where they wanted to be. And then you look at the opening game for Atlas, and they got absolutely shellacked by the Archers. I mean, and the Archers are still riding high on that goal differential from that game. I mean, it was crazy. Yeah. And, you know, Atlas had finished last the last 2 years in a row. And that's as old as the PLL is. You know, it might have been before that, but that's where they are now. But where they were. But the fact is, I felt like as the season went, and I kind of said this here and there, is that every game it's like they got a little bit better. Every game they kind of improved that little bit. And now all of a sudden, here we are towards the very end of the season. And Atlas, we're seeing a team that is a force. You know, we're seeing a team that even the backup goalie right now is doing phenomenal. The defense is doing phenomenal. They're playing clean lacrosse. They aren't having a lot of turnovers. They're getting a lot of ground balls, though. Their attack unit as a whole is elite. Their midfielders are elite. And let's not forget Dox Aiken, who's been mostly absent the entire year, is showing up all of a sudden, which is a big problem for every other team. If they got one more rookie that's going to show up and be a freak, yikes. And then you look at the Water Dogs. On the other hand, the Water Dogs, I feel like, did nothing, quite honestly, for a while. I mean, I was on someone else's podcast and I just said that they're stagnant. Like why are they playing? You know, like they're never horrible. They're never good. They're just kind of there, you know, whatever. And all of a sudden one day the Water Dogs showed up and they decided they wanted to show us all who they were and who they could be, that, you know, those sort of things. And they did it. And they've been winning games since then. And not just winning, but winning in ways that look elite, winning in ways that look convincing, and they look almost comfortable. They look like a team that's supposed to do this. And that is awesome. It's a lot of fun for fans, and it's a lot of fun for this league, and I love it. But to get to your point now, we have these two teams. Here's how they got here, and here's where they're meeting. I think it's going to be interesting because I think Atlas is the real deal. I really, truly think Atlas is the real deal. I think they're a threat to win it all this year, every bit as much as anybody in the league. I think the Water Dogs, on the other hand, I waver just a little, and by that I mean a real little, because I think the Water Dogs, while they've been dominant, they haven't been dominant as long. And so it's kind of like, where is this just a little wave? Is this kind of this momentum? What happens when Ward has an off night? What happens when Ryan Brown can't score anything, or Connor Kelly, or whatever? I'm just giving examples. Yeah. What can the team overcome that? That's where with them I'm a little bit iffy. Atlas, I really think Atlas is the real deal. Win or lose this next game, going into the playoffs, I think that they are a force, and I think every team should be worried about playing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the Atlas, one of the amazing things is, I think I said this on Monday's episode, is in their last 4 or 5 games, I believe, yeah, they have a 5-game winning streak now. In that streak, I believe they're plus 23 in their goal differential, which is now plus 13 for the season. And you mentioned they're still kind of being haunted in a way by that game against the Archers. So it's actually incredible how down they were after that game in terms of score differential to where they are now. And you mentioned what the Archers' score differential is because of that game. So it's really interesting to see how the Atlas have really been able to bounce back from that. And I remembered seeing somewhere within the last few weeks that somebody said that Tucker Durkin even said, yeah, that was our wake-up call. We knew we weren't going to go into that game fully where we wanted to be, but it also made us realize we were nowhere close. Yeah. Right. So we needed to take on that challenge of saying, hey, this is on us. We need to get better in these areas, and here's how we're going to do it. And I've been saying it from day one after that game. I just wanted to see that game-to-game improvement like you talked about, but I didn't think we'd see it this furiously this early on. I thought it was going to be, wait till 2022 type of thing, but here we are right now talking about them as the number 1 team, and like you said, having probably just as much of a shot as a championship team this year as just about anybody else. And I think for the Water Dogs, kind of like you said, they didn't really play all that well the first half of the year. Dylan Ward in particular struggled in the cage. Now these last couple games, you're like, okay, when they're on, they can be on. And it'll be interesting to see, kind of like you said, if that carries over into the postseason, or if this was just kind of, hey, this is who we can be, but there are going to be times where maybe we kind of regress back to what we were at the start of the year. So I think that game against the Atlas and the Water Dogs in a couple weeks is going to be a very highly anticipated game, highly competitive game, and I'm really excited for that one. As an Atlas fan, for me, or just a PLL fan in general, that'll be like the one game that I make sure that I tune into that weekend.
Hey, can I say one more thing to that?
Yeah.
As I think about that matchup, sorry to cut you off there. I was just thinking about, winning versus losing. What's actually better for that game? Obviously, winning has to be better, because you're going to get the bye round, of course. But losing, I was just sitting there thinking a little bit, if a team loses that game, maybe it's not the worst thing, because that's the game right before playoffs start. Either one of those teams is going to make the playoffs. I mean, I think they might have actually both already clinched it, but they're going to be there regardless, whatever it is. And I think if you win that game, awesome. You get to skip that first round. This is a dangerous league. That's beautiful. It's wonderful. But if you lose that game, that's going to kind of give you that motivation, man. It'll give you that kick in the butt that you need going right into the real deal. So, man, I'm not sure why. I just wanted to chime that in. I was just thinking a little bit there that I think it's an interesting thing that either way it could turn out to be something good for either team if they were to lose, if they can take it the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see how that game in particular shapes out, because that is one of the bigger games that weekend, is for that number 1 spot. But another game that's going to be very big that weekend in Albany is the Cannons and the Chrome will face off that weekend as well. The winner gets the 7th and final spot in the playoffs. So Phil, just a moment ago, you said you were sure that they both had clinched a playoff spot. Everybody has clinched except for the Cannons and the Chrome, and it comes down to this game where the winner is in. and whoever loses that game is that 8th team on the outside looking in. So I want to get your thoughts on that Cannons and Chrome game and maybe a prediction as to who you think will get that final spot in the postseason.
Yeah. You know, these are two really interesting teams. I mean, the Chrome has probably been on the biggest roller coaster ride of just about anybody. I mean, they knock out the Whipsnakes and they knock out the Archers in the same weekend when those were the only two undefeated teams. And then here they are at the bottom fighting to get in. I mean, golly, what a year they're trying to have here. And then the Cannons, I look at them, and that's one of the most veteran-riddled teams in the league, and has so much talent. No expansion team will ever have as much talent as they do, like starting off. You look at the draft we had with the whole COVID thing, which allowed basically 2 years of seniors inside the same draft getting picked. You had like the normal expansion draft. You also acquired another league, you know? Come on. So that team is stacked and it's loaded. You know, when I think about the Cannons, it's like kind of part of me wants to feel for them a little bit, because I mean, to have so many games and to lose so many games by one goal, and they're so good, but their record doesn't show it. And it's like, you're right there. I don't know how you can miss out on so many. And Chrome, we've talked about their stuff, but if I'm going to pick what I think is going to happen here, is I'll have to say that the Cannons, I think, are going to be able to pull this one out. I think Lyle Thompson right now is just, he is on fire. I mean, he's feeling it. He's moving. He's doing the impossible, which is just an ordinary day in the office for him. You know, and that's a team that really does well. Morocco does pretty good out there too. And I think also, if I'm going to be honest, I think the Chrome is just having too many struggles right this second. I think the Chrome has kind of lost their identity a little bit. I think defensively, they rely on Galloway a ton. I think if Galloway doesn't have a 70-plus or 65-plus save percentage game, you know, then they lose. And that's a lot to ask of a goalie, to be at that level, to kind of mask the mistakes. They have a lot of turnovers. That's a big issue. So having said those things, I think it's going to be the Cannons that will win. But how far will the Cannons go into the playoffs? I think that they're one of those teams that can be a threat to anyone, hence the 1-goal losses. I mean, they're in it with everyone. Yeah. But I think they're going to go super far? No. I just don't see it happening. But in this particular game, I think they win it. I think they get in. Unfortunately for Chrome, I think they're sitting on the sideline watching the games play on TV. Peacock, excuse me.
Yeah, I think for me, just to kind of give my assessment on this game and on these teams in particular, it's going to be really interesting for me to see, I guess, which positions win out, which style wins out in this game, because you look at face-off, I would give the advantage to Chrome in that situation because of the struggles that the Cannons have had throughout the season at the stripe. But we know how good, like you said, how good this Cannons offense is with guys like Lyle, how good Rabel's been this year, and just how deep they are offensively. I think you have to give the advantage offensively to Cannons, but I would also give the advantage defensively to Cannons in this situation. But I would say goalie, probably about even in this one between Morocco and Galloway. But like you said, it's going to be a lot of pressure on Galloway to really be at his best in that game, especially with the shots that he's going to be seeing from that Cannons offense. So it's almost like, if I had to say, the equalizer in this game is going to be at the stripe, with Connor Farrell's ability to win faceoffs and keep the ball away, if nothing else, keep the ball away from that Cannons offense as much as possible. So like I said, a couple really big games that weekend, the final week of the regular season in PLL action. Atlas Water Dogs playing for that #1 spot in the postseason. Cannons Chrome on the other side, just playing to get into the postseason. But as I said at the top of the show, I want to end this with getting some of your guys' thoughts and comments in the mix as well. So from our buddy Shrek on Twitter, he says, if Phil was in the player pool, which team would pick him up and why would they pick him up? So like I said to you before we jumped on a little bit ago, I want to change the wording of this a little bit. And I want to change it to, if you were in the player pool, who would you want to be picked up by and why?
You know, that's a tough question. First of all, love the question. Second of all, tough question. I will say this: when I played back in the day. There are two things I was really, really good at. It was not scoring or assists, but I was a ground ball machine. I just had the mindset was if the ball dropped and there was 10 guys on the other team right around me, like I was going in it and I was going to get it. And if I didn't get it, I accepted it. But then the next time the ball hit the ground, that was mine. So, I try to think about, like, I think teams that really put an emphasis on basics, and one of the first ones that just jumps to my mind is Whipsnakes with Stagnita, and how he really preaches, going for singles and playing good lacrosse and doing the things you need to do to be right. That's someone I could see trying to get me, but the one that, the other thing that I think I do pretty good now as a coach, and I did good then, is I'm a heck of a motivational guy. I love to boost the team. I love to get everyone amped. When people are feeling down or whatever it is, I love to get the people going. And when I see, look online, I see all sorts of teams that are feeling it and they're having fun. But when I see the Redwoods team and I see Jules and Miles Jones and Perkovic and Garnsey and all those guys, they look like they're always having fun. To me, in my opinion, they always look like they're having a good time. I think that's the team in that respect that I would want to be with, just because of, that mentality of like, let's always keep having fun and laugh and everything. But yeah, ground balls and motivation stuff. Those are my things.
Yeah, I think those would both be two really good teams to go to. Obviously, it's never a bad thing when you get picked up by the back-to-back champs, the Whipsnakes. One that I'm kind of surprised you didn't throw out there, because it's a team that I know when we've had you on here before, you've talked a lot about, is the Archers. I thought that was a team that I would hear you throw out there at some point. And then when you started getting into the whole motivation thing, immediately my mind went to Andy Towers and the Chaos. Yeah. So when you threw the Redwoods out there, I was like, okay, I could see that. But I immediately went to Chaos. So I was like, yeah, that'd probably be a guy that I would want to play for too.
I don't know if I could keep up
the picks there, though.
I don't know if I could keep up with Towers.
He's just an absolute unit of energy. But yeah, love the question there by Shrek, our buddy. You can hit me up at Stevie Mac Media is my Twitter handle for all show-related and PLL-related topics. That's how they got a hold of me. Brian on Twitter says, speculation, rumors, etc. on the next expansion team. So anything that you might know about that, anything that you might have heard or read regarding a possible next expansion team.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything recently. Something that is, kind of well known at this point is that at a certain point the Rebels would like to make this a city-based league, much like the NFL or Major League Baseball or what have you, where you'd have the Columbus Archers or what have you. So they'd like to do that, and I know that there's plans where they want to kind of fill it out and keep growing this league. As far as when or what that means, I'm not sure, but I will say that I would count on there being another team added this offseason. That's not based on that's not me trying to do wink wink or like, believe me. I just think that would be the case. I personally would love to see him add 2 and round it out at 10. The problem is that you can't do an expansion league or draft for 2 different teams at one time. Might get tough, and with these expansion teams, you don't want to get to a point where you're diluting how good the league is. Right. That's the other thing. We want to keep it growing when there's so much talent right now with other MLL guys that aren't on rosters right now that should be. So it should keep growing, but as excited as we all are as fans, we do have to be careful because we don't want it to turn into, like, oh, we've got 25 teams and there's like 3 All-Americans on each one. That sort of situation. And then as far as names, I'd be interested. This is something I'm curious about. Is I'd be interested to see, are they going to do a fresh new team name, kind of like they obviously did with the original 6 and the Water Dogs, or will it be like the Bayhawks LLC, like there, or what I'm saying, or so the Little Lizards or things like that. I'm not sure. Be interested to see that as well, but unfortunately no current rumors. But I would say at the rate right now with the growth that they're trying to achieve, I would assume that we're going to see a lot more.
Yeah, and I think just to get my quick 2 cents in on it, it seems like what they're at least what I think they're hoping for is to do one team like each year or so until they absorb all those MLL teams. So I think what they're going for is to bring those MLL teams in and kind of like you said, make them the Lizards LC or whatever, kind of like they did with the Cannons. And two teams that I've seen names thrown around for since the Cannons were the first ones brought in was possibly the Outlaws being the next one. Or I believe, like you said, I think the Bayhawks was the other one that I saw. So it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues and they stick with the MLL teams, bringing them in, making them the Outlaws LC or whatever, like you said. And then kind of like I said, I think they're going to do that one team each year, even if it's an odd number. They'll figure out something schedule wise for how these weekend games will go, but I think they'll do it one at a time until all those teams are officially brought in, and that's when you'll start to see that conversation about city structure as far as the team placement will go. But I don't think you're going to get into that until all those teams are officially brought over. And then the last comment from Brian as well was he wants to know potential championship matchup given the way that the standings currently look. So obviously earlier we talked about Atlas Water Dogs playing for that number one spot, Cannons Chrome working their way to get into the postseason. So Brian wants to get your thoughts on a potential championship matchup here in 2021 for the PLL.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I think Atlas, I do think that they'll be in it. Hopefully I didn't just jinx them or curse them, but I do think Atlas will be in it. The other side I think about is the Archers. I definitely think the Archers are as talented as anyone on paper. Thing is that, they win on a 3-game loss streak. And if you told me that at the beginning of the year, I would have been pretty surprised with how stacked that team is. So they can be a little bit, this way, that way, but maybe that loss streak is all they needed to get going. And then I also think about the Redwoods a little bit because I think the Redwoods, I've said since the Cannons game at the beginning of the year, are probably the most Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde team in lacrosse. Even in that first game, you didn't know what you were going to get. I mean, you look at the Chaos game they lost. They didn't score in the second quarter, and they didn't score in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's just for some reason at times they can't quite get things to click. They'll miss, this last game where they played the Archers. They had 3 2-pointers, huge, great, but those also kind of help mask how bad their shooting was on trying to hit the cage the rest of the game. But then at the same time, they've got TD, who is the best in the league. Troutner steps up, the defense steps up, and the offense is just move the ball and scoring. And Kavanaugh's gone off this year. So it's like, which team are you going to get? And I think if the Redwoods can stay on and what they're getting going, their kind of attitude, they can be a team that's easily there. But they cannot afford to slip up because every time they've slipped up this year, that's when they've missed a game. Atlas, on the other hand, I mean, I really believe in them to at least get there.
Yeah, and I think real quick before we get ready to wrap this episode up, just to get my thoughts on the potential championship matchups that we might see. Like you said, I think it's hard to discount the Atlas at this point with what they've been able to do over the past 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season with what they've done. 5-game winning streak now, having that number one spot in the standings. And as an Atlas fan myself, I would love to see, after being a day one Atlas fan all the way back from the very beginning, to see them make it that far. And even if they don't win it, just to make it to that game after the way they started the year and after how nobody really expected them to be this good, this fast with the moves that they made this past offseason. Would love to see them even just make it to that championship game. But like you said, I think it's really there's a group of 4 that really I think you could make a case for getting there. Whip Snakes, depending on what Justin Guterding can do with this offense, maybe could work their way into that group. But for me, it's really the Atlas, the Archers, the Redwoods, and then the Water Dogs, kind of like you said earlier on in the show, what kind of team are they going to be once we hit postseason play? So that'll definitely be a team that I think has more than enough there to be able to make that kind of a championship run. And then really it's kind of everybody else, whether the Cannons or the Chrome make it. Chaos maybe can steal a game in the first round and shake things up. the rest of the postseason, but it'll be very interesting to see how that all shakes out. As always, as we've been saying, basically this entire season, we never know what's going to happen from game to game, and I think the postseason is going to be no different. But Phil, thank you so much for joining me on this episode, man. That'll do it for me and Phil on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. As always, guys, let us know what you thought about some of the things we covered here on this episode. You can also check out the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor. It's even on YouTube as well for you to find there. But that'll do it for me and Phil. We'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks.